So in our reading today, we learned a relation that Jesus had that we didn't know that maybe he had with Nicodemus. Nicodemus is a leader of the Jewish people. He was in charge of interpreting the law, of seeing what the Old Testament said, and then going off and doing it, and being a judge, actually, in some cases, on how people live their life. And so when he comes up to Jesus, this isn't just some dude coming up to Jesus. This is a really important man who has come up to Jesus. Now, a lot of people don't like this Jesus cat. So when Nicodemus does it, he has to do it at night. He does it at night so that, for obvious reasons, nobody catches him. Because if somebody were to see him coming up to Jesus, that could be a whole big problem. And he doesn't want that problem in his life. He wants to have a nice and easy life. And so what happens here is that Nicodemus is struggling. He's struggling with what he understands to be the truth. He was convicted in the Spirit, if you can believe that or not, that the Spirit was moving even in Nicodemus' time. And so he comes to Jesus and he says, look, I understand that what you're doing is true. And I understand that the things that you're saying are powerful. And I've heard people give testimony, and I've seen people be healed, and I believe that you are from God. I believe you truly are the power of God manifest in this world, and I want to believe, says Nicodemus. I want to believe whole hog. I want to go head first, but I can't. And the reason he can't is for the same reason we can't today, because it turns out following Jesus is inconvenient. He can't stop his entire life and just follow Jesus, which is what's supposed to be. He's supposed to look like those fishermen, but this isn't a fisherman. This is a man of renown. He spent his entire life walking this one path to get to this point. He's from a family that gave him opportunity that other people didn't have. He has talents and ability. He can read, he can write, he can do all these things that the world doesn't have. He is a very special man, and he just can't throw that away for some little old Jesus. And so he's struggling. He's got this entire life, and in front of him he's got this God. And we know what Christ says. We know that Christ says everything, all of it, your entire life. It is not up for debate, all of it. Love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. And we know that this is what we're supposed to do, and we end up wrestling in the same way that Nicodemus wrestles. He and I, you and him, we're all pretty much in the same boat, which is that we know that we're supposed to put Jesus first. We're supposed to love everyone. We're always supposed to be caring, relying on Jesus to fulfill us in our lives, to be faithful to him, all the way. And yet I have insurance and 401ks. Can you get with that? Who puts on their seatbelt when they get in the car? Duh! That's the smart thing to do. But somehow, if we're supposed to be like truly with Jesus, we're supposed to not give two tars to walk out onto the water knowing that we will walk upon the water and not walk into the water. And Jesus says, hey, you know what? If you are born of the Spirit, you can have this kingdom of God. Now, to be born of the Spirit for Nicodemus wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense. He probably wouldn't have understood what that meant. You and I, we all have this advantage of being 2,000 years after Pentecost. We know that the Spirit comes. We know that he works in our life. And for almost all of us, we know that we have that Spirit. We have been baptized. That's where the Spirit comes and takes hold of us. And Jesus says, look, there is this kingdom of heaven, this kingdom of God, that God rules in heaven, but there is also a kingdom of heaven, a kingdom of God, in the world on earth right now. And you can see that. You can watch God in control. In the same way that God controls heaven, he can control earth. And you can see that. This is not some far-off thing. If you but follow. If you but live a spirit life and not a flesh life. Jesus makes this separation. In fact, later on, as he's talking to some of the disciples, he tells them, he says, look, you'll see greater things than the ones that I've done. John 14, he says, if you have faith, if you believe, you will do even greater things than I have done here. But I think if we're honest, we think that that's somehow back there. It's back in the Bible and has nothing to do with us. And if we're really, really honest, and we look at our lives, it doesn't always look like the apostles. It doesn't always look like what Jesus did our lives. You know it, I know it. Nicodemus knew it when he was talking to Jesus. He knew what it meant to do, and he didn't want to do that. He knew that what we're supposed to do is supposed to follow Jesus and dive head first. And not supposed to worry about where we land. If we end up splatting like a bug on the windshield of life, okay, that's all right. That means the door just opened earlier. This is what we're supposed to do. And I tell you, as I look in front of all of you, I'm not going to splat myself on the windshield of life. I'm your pastor. I'm wearing all the pretty colors in a dress, and that's not my goal in life. And I got to believe you're following me, right? That's not our goal in life, but we know it is. We know it is. And when we look at the Christians of old, we know that they did it too. And if one Christian goes splat, well, that's all right. But if thousands of Christians go splat, you know what happens? It makes this huge impact in the world. Think of Rome, the Roman Empire, and all the power therein. How many Christians died in the Colosseums of Rome? This big, huge being. It took how many Christian lives? And if it weren't for those Christian lives, we might believe that Rome was truly a peaceful nation. They said as much, Pax Romana. They had all this propaganda. And there was a peace to be had. But it took Christians dying to splat on the windshield that is the Roman Empire, and it reverberates even to this day. Thousands of years later, we can say, oh, look. These Christians, they understood Jesus so well that they were willing to give everything they had up to, including their life, for their God. Shouldn't we just go splat? And my answer is I struggle with that. This faith is a struggle. And that's why I call it a faith journey. It's a journey without really wanting to obey your compass is what ends up happening. And if you've ever been out in the wilderness, if you're a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout or something like this, if you've ever been lost without a map, you know what it is to all of a sudden disregard signs. Can you imagine being lost and then saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to turn my phone on to find out where I am or ask anyone for directions or even look at the stars to find out where north is. I'm just going to keep going with what my gut says. This is going to be a struggle. And you're going to be on one crazy journey if this is how you travel in the world, but this is exactly what we do in our faith life. I do it too. In this faith journey, this struggle, it ends up being even more grotesque because what happens is, and the Old Testament talks about this, when we leave Jesus, we don't just go on a little adventure by ourselves, we follow some other God. If you can imagine Jesus is the North Star, and if you just follow the North Star, you'll head north or whichever direction you want to go. But then all of a sudden you decide you're going to follow some other star. You just pick one at random, this one, and you follow it. Turns out this one moves on you and has flashing lights and is landing in Miami. But you decided you were going to follow that star or whatever it is you decide to put in your life. God says, and the Old Testament agrees, this is idolatry. When we put anything in front of God, this is idolatry. This is the worst. You shall have no God but God, the very first commandment. And there we go, we fill and we put something else in. And the Old Testament calls this very clearly what it is. He says, this is adultery. You've decided to worship another God. You've been unfaithful. And God uses this exact language. He says, Israel has been unfaithful. Because we've substituted our own will or something else we wanted for what God tells us is truth. And then we get lost. And it's so easy to get lost, y'all. We, as humans, believe all kinds of silly things. I mean, crazy, stupid things. There are people who believe the earth is flat. Oh, you laugh. Don't laugh because statistics say that somebody in the church believes the earth is flat. There are people who believe that Elvis is alive. That he's hanging out. I don't know. Maybe he's in Miami on that airplane. There's people that believe the moon landing was faked. If you look close, you can see a Doritos bag up there. Yeah, no, and there are people who drink their own urine because they think it's going to make them healthy. Don't do that. It's disgusting, but this is what I'm getting at. You look at this and you say, man, who could believe Elvis is alive or that somebody should drink their own urine? That's just wrong. But it is as clear to God and Jesus in the same regard how we follow our own desires, how we fill in our own blanks instead of following God. And then we get lost. And then we're on this journey, And in this journey, we see and experience all kinds of evil and sin, and it breaks us down. And we say, God, where are you? How come you're not doing anything in this world right now? I'm seeing all kinds of gross, evil things. And God said, well, I'm over here. What are you doing over there? And then we come back after leaving God. And we come back and we follow Him. And then we leave Him again. And then we come back and we follow, and this time we're going to be good, this time it's going to be perfect, and then we leave Him again. And there's this back and forth, and there's this yes, and then there's no, and I want to love you completely, Jesus, but, on the other hand, maybe there's a different way. And all this back and forth and all this wishy-washy, God is still steadfast. He still is full of loving kindness, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Love that we don't deserve. And it's in this struggle and in the coming back and the being given love that we don't deserve that shows that our God truly is God. Because none of us would put up with any of that from anyone else. Coming and going and back and forth and lying and cheating and stealing. This is not the thing that any of us would put up with once or twice, let alone an untold number of times. And yet God does. And He says, it's in that unadulterated loving that you will see that I am God. And we call it grace. And it is not earned or deserved. It's given for free because our God is truly God and loves us that much. And that in our struggles, if we could understand just a little bit of the love that He truly has for us, then maybe in our life we might be able to reflect some of that love. And we might be the light of the world. That's what it means when we realize just truly how loved we are, that we might show somebody who does not deserve love, love. That when somebody wrongs us, that we might actually forgive them. That when somebody strays, that we might say, come back, and we might help them find their way into a loving relationship with God. That we might be for the world the love that God has already given us to those who don't deserve it, because God loved us first. It's grace. It's a beautiful thing. And it's ours.